So good morning, and welcome to this EU-LAC Economic Forum that Bruegel jointly co-organizes with GIGA in Hamburg and the Real Instituto Elcano in Madrid. It's a real pleasure for us to host today's event. It's the second in this row, and the idea of this event, when we started to conceptualize and design that 2.5 years ago, was to create a forum for EU Latin American debates, mostly focused on economics, but not only focusing on economics. We felt more than 2 years ago already that we live in quite, let's say, turbulent times where there's a lot of confusion on who are the friends, who are not the friends, where's the politics going around the globe. And of course, I think what we've seen when a year ago, I think I was mentioning that, I'm quite worried about the way things go in the United States, and I think strategically for the European Union it's important to look at other players around the world, including Latin America, to a place to which we have, I think, very long-standing relations in all dimensions. And I think yesterday's decision by the US President not to take Javier Solana, not to let him travel into the United States, is just a recent example of the confusion that I think currently exists on the other side of the Atlantic, on the northern side of the Atlantic. So I'm very delighted to host today this event. We have a number of very interesting panel debates. So one panel debate is on more a sectoral approach, where we look at telecommunication infrastructure, connectivity, and the effects of digitalisation. We have one which is more on cultural and academic ties, and then we have a lunch. After the lunch, we have a debate which is much more focusing on the economic cooperation in a global context, where my colleague Alicia Garcia Herrero will present a paper on the EU competition, the European Union companies have in Latin America coming from China. So it takes really a global approach. Now, before that, we will, of course, have our opening speeches, and I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to have Neven Mimica, the European Commissioner for Development and Cooperation here, who will give a keynote. But before I give the floor to him, and we have Guillermo Fernandez de Soto, who will give the other keynote. And now I think we have the lights finally working in the right way. So the light is on. And so Guillermo will give the second keynote. But before I give the floor to the keynote speakers, let me give the floor to our two co-organizers, Emilio Lamo de Espinosa, President of Elcano, and then Bert Hoffmann from GIGA, the head of the Berlin office. Emilio, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be back again here, taking part in this second edition of a forum that I hope will soon become a well-established tradition in Brussels. Let's hope so. We all believe, I think, that the European Union needs to create a deeper bi-regional relations with Latin America, and events such as this, which blend the world of think tanks with those that devote themselves to public administration and business, is probably a most appropriate context. From this perspective, the growing cooperation between the Bruegel Institute, the Hamburg-based German Institute of Global and Area Studies, and the Elcano Royal Institute is starting to bear remarkable results. That's why my initial word of thanks would focus on those who enable this cooperation, both at Bruegel and at GIGA, as well as our own teams in Brussels and Madrid. And once again, of course, the support of Telefónica has been crucial to make this forum a reality. The decision of our three institutions to embark upon this venture was no accident, and comes at a time of a number of initiatives that share a wish to reassess the strategic interests of the relationship between the European Union and Latin America. Of course, as we all know, global strategy, the European global strategy, refers to the existence of a wider Atlantic space and declares that the European Union will expand cooperation and build stronger partnership with Latin America and the Caribbean. Prominent among such initiatives is the European Parliament's new strategy for the bi-regional relationship. And there is also the European External Action Service communication on the state of bi-regional relations, first attempt of this type within the framework of the global architecture of the European Union's foreign policy. Note that both GIGA and the Elcano Royal Institute are actively participating in the groundwork that should lead to drawing up the communication. As you probably know, a few months ago at the Elcano Royal Institute, we published a paper titled precisely Why Latin America Matters. Our main goal was and is still to draw the attention of the European Union, meaning the institutions, the member states, politicians, news media, public opinion, to the potential offered by Latin America. We believe at the Elcano certainly that Latin America deserves much more attention than is usually granted. We are talking of a population of 650 million, well, without considering the United States. Let's ask Trump what he thinks about the United States being a Latin American country, with a healthy demography, about 7% of the world population, a region with the strongest cultural unity in language, law, religion, customs, compare, for example, the cultural unity of Latin America with that of Europe, or Africa, or Asia. Politically, Latin America had a very successful process of state building, almost no failed states, and a successful democratic transitions too, certainly with hybrid or flow democracies, like everywhere, by the way, but more similar to Europe than to Asia or, of course, to Africa. Moreover, government effectiveness scores high according to the World Bank and is certainly improving. It's an economy of $5 trillion of GDP, according to the World Bank, higher than Japan, and with two countries, Brazil and Mexico, among the 15 biggest world economies measured in purchasing power parity. Finally, and I think it deserves to be mentioned, Latin America scores very high in the Human Development Index, only comparable to that of Europe. So that is not certainly a bad record. Moreover, in contrast to the instability prevalent in Africa, Asia, large part of the Mediterranean, even in the Atlantic, the Latin America region offers today much greater predictability. It is indeed paradoxical that when Latin America, the native place of populism, is leaving it behind, moving to a much more mature citizenship, populism returns to Europe and does so in its more aggressive variant, nationalism and even identity nationalism. So the current circumstances are highly auspicious for a reassessment and a positive reassessment of Latin America. In this context, I would like to highlight also the initiative of the EU-LAC Foundation with our support, which involves launching a similar project but running in the opposite direction, namely, why does Europe matter? Or to put it another way, what should Europe matter to Latin America? It seems clear that in order to make progress on bi-regional relations, we first have to go beyond simple rhetoric. We need to furnish it with content. Culture, in all its manifold expressions, as we shall have the chance to see over the course of this conference, provides a common bedrock on which to build the most solid foundations. Meanwhile, the digital revolution, as well as climate change, the development of renewable energies are also crucial issues with the potential to bring our two regions closer. We should push both paternalism and victimization aside and realize that we have the clearest potential for a unique win-win situation. Negotiations to sign an association agreement with Mercosur are currently awaiting finalization. It has been, as we know, a never-ending story that has been dragging on for far too long. Signing the association agreement would send a powerful signal concerning the European Union's interest in Latin America. The cost of non-agreement is far higher than the cost of an agreement, and the benefits for both sides could be enormous. And let me finish with a much more general comment. We know that in a few years, Europe will account for roughly 6% of the world's population, something similar to the United States. Latin America will account then by another 6 or 7% of the world population. The whole West will be less than 20% of the world's population. Meanwhile, Africa will account for another 20% before jumping to being 40% by the end of the century, and Asia will account for another 40%. As we know, China is already the first economic power in terms of purchasing power parity, overcoming the United States, and India has already surpassed Japan. Many other countries are catching up. Some are democratic, like India or Brazil, others are not. Some are nuclear powers, others will like to be. Globalization is emerging with an agenda of world problems, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, climate change, crime, migration, many others that we do not know how to manage. We need a caucus of solid democratic countries that share history, languages, religion, values, and beliefs, an alliance of democracies. The nucleus of this alliance has been undoubtedly the transatlantic alliance between Europe and the United States. However, can we rely on it? Nobody knows. Let us see what happens in the midterm elections in November in the US to assess to what extent Trump is an accident in the political history of the United States, or is it, to the contrary, as it seems now, a long-term and a structural tendency. As Angela Merkel said, Europe must take its destiny in our own hands. In any case, Latin America constitutes also a transatlantic relation, a South Atlantic relation, opening a huge potential, a three-continental relation between Europe, America, and Africa. Latin America should assert itself as what it is, an essential part of Western civilization. The West is sustained by three pillars, not two, Europe and the two Americas, North and South. We need allies, and we should not miss this historic opportunity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. A warm welcome from my side too. Thank you for joining us here. Thank you also for the excellent speakers we have the whole day and also this morning. So I will be brief because we have other people to speak further here. I just could echo a lot of the things that are said, but first, thank you very much to the Bruegel Institute and to the Instituto Elcano. I think it's a great pleasure for us and a great honor to have this forum established here, and I hope we can continue it in this form, which combines, as Guntram already said, not only the economic perspectives, but also it's the cultural foundations and the political constellations, which I think are very important. As I said, no long talk from my side, just one idea I would want to give you. We had last week in Berlin the foreign policy director of the Brookings Institute, and one of probably his main message was, with our, he said, president kind of destroying much of the bridges that had been built and much of the political system we had established as the West, there's a lot of responsibility on the rest of the West, as he called it, to band together and to perhaps save, I mean, we're in a certain defensive mode, but perhaps save part of that or defend some of the accomplishments we had. And also there are perspectives in that and in closer cooperation. So I think there really is not only the short term, what do we do with Latin America here and there, but actually there's quite a sense of responsibility that is put on our common shoulders. And without further ado, actually, I would pass on to our distinguished speakers. Thank you very much and have a very good day.
Thank you, Bart.
So, very good morning, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, let me thank our colleagues at Bruegel Elcano Royal Institute and GIGA Latin America Studies for hosting us here today. I'm very happy to join you all for this second high-level meeting of the EU Latin America and Caribbean Economic Forum. Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean have undergone profound changes in recent years. The effects of globalization have profoundly touched all citizens and the global political and socio-economic landscape. This has resulted in our need to review our strategic interests differently. In these turbulent times, strong international leadership and effective partnerships built on our common values and interests are needed more than ever. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is the best framework for addressing our common challenges, combating climate change, ending poverty and inequalities in our lifetime. In this context, the new European Consensus on Development shows the European Union's strong commitments in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals through our European external actions. These frameworks recognize the need for a new, comprehensive and universal approach to international and development cooperation. This means focusing on all dimensions of development: economic, social, human development and environment, and engaging all global partners at every stage in their development. What does this mean for Latin America and the Caribbean specifically? In September, the Commission and the High Representative will unveil a new strategy for our future relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. This will be our first strategy for the region in well over 9 years, and our opportunity for putting forward a vision on how do we want to engage with the region in the years to come. Latin America and the European Union share many common values: strong belief in multilateralism, in democracy and human rights, and in the value of a rule-based trade system. Therefore, it is in our interest to put forward an ambitious and attractive framework for cooperation. Specifically, in the area of development cooperation, the challenges are twofold. On one hand, most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are advancing towards higher levels of income, while on the other, they are exposed to a set of development challenges that can be blindsided by development achievements measured solely in terms of GDP per capita. These challenges or vulnerabilities range from ramping inequalities, disproportionate exposure to natural catastrophes as a result of climate change, lack of social cohesion, insecurity and organized crime. I would name just few of them. Therefore, I do believe that we need to find a way to help these countries to bridge the gap when transitioning from traditional development assistance to other forms of international support. We need to increase the scope and flexibility of our cooperation. Solutions such as transfer of know-how and capacity building, triangular cooperation, enhanced support to investments and the private sector, as well as other more specific mechanisms to deal with some of those vulnerabilities, need to be present in our future relationship. We already have a long and successful history of applying new types of policies, practices, and instruments in the region. As a response to these challenges, we are already working on a new, more strategic and dynamic future framework for Europe's relations with Latin America and the Caribbean, which we have named Development in Transition. This program will allow us to explore better ways to respond to the new and complex challenges that come with the transition to higher levels of income. We recently signed 2 new strategic partnerships with the governments of Costa Rica and Panama at this year's European Development Days earlier this month. These open new possibilities for engagement and innovation, from exchanging best practices in key sectors of common interest to working together with other partners in the region through triangular cooperation and South-South cooperation. Both of these approaches offer multiple benefits and break down the outdated notion that development cooperation flows only from north to south. It's about ensuring tailored, demand-driven and country-owned responses, and the exchange of best practices and expertise in all directions. Countries on similar path of development are able to engage and innovate, share expertise and experiences, mobilize additional funding from emerging donors, and drive further regional development. More innovative partnerships are also about breaking down the barriers between the public and private sectors, particularly when it comes to development cooperation. We all know that responsible private investments is key to unlocking additional financing for inclusive and sustainable growth. We have already been partnering with the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean to increase productivity and job creation. Our flagship regional program, I'll Invest, supported almost 60,000 small and medium enterprises in 18 Latin American countries between 2009 and 2013. Every euro we contributed created 5 euros of new business, generated exports of nearly 85 billion euros in Mexico, Central America and Cuba alone. In 2016, the Latin America Investment Facility generated over €1 billion of additional financing for sustainable development, or 15 euros for every euro invested from the EU budget. We are convinced of the success of this approach. This is why, in our proposal to the European Parliament and to the Council for the new European Union 7 years budget beyond 2020, we have put forward the idea of extending the current European Fund for Sustainable Development, both with much more means, up to 60 billion euros for the guarantees, de-risking schemes for the investments, and also enlarging to the worldwide geographical coverage, the support for the investments in development projects. More and more, we are moving from traditional development cooperation to more modern partnerships for mutual benefit. This could mean greater regional trade integration, as reflected in the Mercosur negotiations, or prospects for closer cooperation with the Pacific Alliance in the future. It could also mean greater cooperation in scientific research through the Horizon 2020 program, or working towards a single digital market space and increasing productivity, competitiveness, and growth throughout our regions. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of progress has already been achieved in Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of increased economic growth and considerable reduction in poverty. But structural inequalities persist, which prevent partners from reaching their full economic potential. Overcoming these barriers will require new drivers of growth, new resources, and greater investment in people. The European Union, Latin America, and the Caribbean are natural partners. So we will continue to support their path to a long-lasting and inclusive growth and increase productivity and prosperity for all citizens. So I look forward to continuing and improving our cooperation to ensure that we leave no one behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I understand you have a little bit of time, but until around 10, so I wonder whether we can have your speech and then we take a few questions so that our audience has a chance to talk with you also. So the next speaker is Guillermo Fernandez de Soto, who's the corporate director for Europe of CAF. CAF is the Corporación Andina de Fomento, so it's the Latin American Development Bank with the headquarters in Caracas in Venezuela.
But mine in Madrid.
But you are in Madrid, so so I guess you don't want to talk about Venezuela, which is of course an interesting country to look at. But please, we very much look forward to your speech and intervention.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to participate in this platform of political and economic dialogue organized by the Bruegel Foundation, El Real Instituto Elcano, and our friends from the GIGA. This forum allows us to share experiences, discuss challenges, and propose solutions on worldwide matters. This second edition acquires a special relevance in the current international context. Today, global governance is more complex than ever. New powers have emerged, and forms of populism and protectionism are increasing. The EU and Latin America must strengthen their ties and make a solid alliance in an effort to contribute to global order. There are many challenges ahead with unknown frontiers. The effects of climate change threaten our territories. Hunger, war, economic and social problems have made hundreds of thousands of people flee their countries, making immigration a humanitarian crisis and a priority of the international agenda. A special mention needs to be made about the impact of this cruel reality towards the accomplishment of the Sustainable Development Objectives due in 2030, one of the transcendent agreements reached in the past. To this extent, multilateralism is needed more than ever, but it is not living its brightest moments. Some trends try to undermine and diminish its influence. This is the reason why, for example, President Macron's central idea is to rescue the concept of European sovereignty, including the capacity to defend and preserve the principles and shared values of the Western world that will help defeat national populism, terrorism, external threats, and humanitarian crisis. The historical commitments established at the end of the Second World War confirm that the world based on development, peace, and security cannot be built without a common law, and Europe and Latin America have a unique opportunity to lead on crucial topics to modernize global governance. It is well known that the relationship between Europe and Latin America is a story of success for both regions. The EU has contributed to economic and social development, being the largest source of official development assistance to Latin America, becoming a main trader and leading direct investor. Additionally, there is no doubt that business partnerships have proven to be beneficial. Europe invests in Latin America with a long-term perspective. European companies have adapted to working in Latin America, principally in processes, markets, and requirements, thus generating employment, establishing healthy competition, and promoting the application of best practices at international standards. Likewise, over the last decade, the business relationship has strengthened by the growing participation of the so-called multilatinas in the European markets. Much more can be done, not only on a commercial aspect, but also in political dialogue and cooperation, which is fundamental in addressing the above mentioned. Please let me allow a brief reflection. Latin America is not the same region. It was almost 40 years ago when the EU defined its cooperation policies for development. And if we look back on the last decades, it is clear that the region has changed in many ways. Most countries have reached democratic and economic stability, poverty levels have reduced, and the middle class grew. In economic terms, growth prospects seem to improve. An increase in GDP of 2% this year and 2.8% next year is expected, driven mainly by the recovery of global demand and progress in the process of fiscal adjustment. However, as the Commissioner mentioned, these perspectives are clearly insufficient to close the inequality gap, consolidate the new middle classes, and overcome obstacles to progress in the region. Today, its needs are very different. For this reason, some of the recent reports about the region, published by CAF, jointly with institutions such as the OECD, highlights priorities, including skills and the strengthening of institutions that allow Latin America to achieve better levels of productivity in the years to come. Without any doubt, one of the central matters that needs to be discussed in favor of future integration and cooperation are institutions. The current challenges entail more open, credible, capable, and innovative institutions. Europe can be a great ally in helping our countries in those efforts in productivity and institutional consolidation. Many Latin American countries, through a rich and middle-income category, indicating that a different approach in the relationship with the EU is initiating a new level of collaboration and commitment is on the horizon. I'm glad to know that the EU is working on a process of reflection regarding how to establish this new framework of engagement with Latin American countries with a new development and transition facility, including CAF, along with other multilateral and bilateral development agencies in the discussion. To achieve these objectives, CAF considers that it is essential to close the infrastructure gap. The region is lagging behind even when compared to other emerging regions. According to CAF estimates, investment of between 200 billion and $250 billion per year are needed. Improve the quality of education. Improving education requires promoting the use of technology, refining early childhood education, reinforcing professional technical education system, and raising standards, as well as preparing our teachers. Innovation is indispensable to increase productivity. The region should reinforce its learning centers and developing financial mechanisms dedicated to enterprises. For CAF, the greatest task is promote innovation that generates greater productivity. Let me highlight main opportunities between the two regions. First, there is plenty of room to deepen our trade relation. It is key to close the free trade agreement with Mercosur, which would facilitate trade with approximately 46% of the regional population and more than 40% of GDP. But if achieved, the EU will have trade agreement with practically the entire region and sending a clear message to the world in the middle of arising protectionism measures. Second, the international environment and regional changes represent unique opportunities. China's growing interest in Latin America is tempting the Asian giant to invest and have more presence in the region. Third, Latin America has distinctive characteristics that made it a perfect ally for its natural resources, renewable energy, middle-class growth, an attractive market with greater potential demands for products of medium and high technological content exported by the EU. The current scenario is complex and perplexing. The EU and Latin America have demonstrated that they are capable of overcoming major difficulties. They are called to play a leading role in laying the foundation and stabilizing flow and order based on international law and basic principles of coexistence shared by all. The bi-regional strategic partnership between Europe and Latin America is now more necessary than ever before because it looks for ways to overcome fragmentation. We must seize the moment and take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for these additional points and also highlighting the need to not just talk about the strategic relation, but actually move to action, be it on the trade deal with Mercosur or on other things. Now, let me open the floor. We have time for a few questions, remarks, comments to our two keynote speakers, but of course also to Bert and Emilio. Who would like to break the ice and ask the first question? Well, okay. So perhaps let me ask the first question to the Commissioner. So you very much emphasized, of course, the importance of development aid and how much it activates additional investments. Now, of course, you are the Commissioner for Development, so your focus is on that file. Now, still, I think one of our approaches here was to think of our relation with Latin America not just as a relation in terms of development aid, but also a relation in terms of trade and in terms of cultural ties and many other links. So how do you see development aid that obviously Europe has been giving to Latin America evolving to much more reflect, I guess, the more multifaceted relation and the fact that Latin America is growing very rapidly and that, of course, there's other big players entering into Latin America, such as China. I mean, I mentioned we have this upcoming piece or the piece has just been published by Alicia Garcia Herrero, a senior fellow here at Bruegel, and she shows that basically the competition that European firms have in Latin America has increased massively now from Chinese firms, not just from the US firms, but from Chinese firms. So this is not just about development aid, it's about fostering a strong relation, economic relation, trade relation, and using Latin America, of course, also as a market for European companies. So how do you see the interplay between these various economic tools that the European Union has vis-à-vis Latin America?
Well, yes, indeed. It is a fact that the most, if not all, Latin American countries are transiting to the higher levels of income, and even formally, if we look at this process, they might not be qualified any longer for let us say, traditional grant-based, official development assistance-based support by European Union or any other development partners. But we in the European Union, being the strongest global leader in development cooperation, we do not want to go along the lines of a just simple measuring the level of GDP and then decide whether to go into official development assistance or not. For us, Latin America is more than GDP level-based approach. Latin America for us is really a comprehensive partner that we would like to develop all forms of relationship and cooperation. This is a really excellent example where we can do much more together in the interest of the both continents if we go along the lines of this development in transition concept, which means kind of a transition from money to knowledge. It's about developing the relationship that is based on knowledge exchange, on know-how, on technology exchange, on a common policy dialogue, common assistance in cooperating with the third countries in triangular cooperation. It's about bringing new forms or new means of developing cooperation on board of our development relationship with Latin America, and this is about engaging private sector on board of development partnership in supporting the investments. Also, it is about trade relations or aid for trade that we have to develop, and it's even much more than economy. It's about cultural and all other forms of historic ties that we have to develop. Therefore, Latin America is really at the focus of this new approach that would generally set the let us say globally the new development relationship on the new platforms, on the new levels. But it is really not only about let us say the relations between developed and developing countries, because I really do not like this division of developed and developing countries, because in each and every country you have almost the same levels, at least 3-4 levels of development or underdevelopment, and therefore the Sustainable Development Goals agenda really target each and every country. This is universal approach where we have a lot of joint interest and joint means to support, to accompany countries in achieving sustainable development goals. And sustainability, when it comes to sustainability, to reach the sustainability goals, we are all developing countries actually. We have all the work to do to come to the sustainability. Therefore, for us, Latin America is a partner where we would like not to compete with others, because for European, for instance, when trying to look into Chinese engagement and investments in Latin America, European investors, they do not have let us say free areas, so without competition in any of the regions. So it's really about setting our best approach to investments that would give this additional development impact and additional competitiveness impact to the partner countries. So we shall continue along these lines in order really to contribute in Latin America to be able to answer the key question now, because today the key question is not do we have enough economic growth, or is economic growth high enough? The key question is the economic growth sustainable enough? Is it inclusive enough? And we would like to assist and to work with Latin American countries in order to give a positive answer to this sustainability question of the development.
Okay, I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Please, yes. And please identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Margarita Starkevičiūtė. I'm a member of National Culture Board in Lithuania, but actually here I am in capacity as a member of Evaluation Committee for Fair Trade Award, which will be granted tomorrow for one of the EU cities. So my question is, do you think, Commissioner, or also members of the panel, about the possibility to expand fair trade program or support for such type of programs, because those fair trade allows to contain populism? It's focused on particular features of the economy, and also a lot of cities, as I learned from this evaluation committee work, are willing to participate, EU cities willing to participate in this such type of activities, but maybe some support or some enhanced cooperation in this field is needed.
Thank you. Perhaps we can collect if there's a second. Oh, please, yes.
Hello, my name is Antoine Mascolin. I am from the EU-LAC Economic Institute. As perhaps you know, the European Union is part of the LAC region with the outermost regions. And my question is could the European Commission give a specific rules for cooperation with the outermost regions?
Okay, a third question, or in the back? No, nobody? Okay, so let me give the floor to both of you. Also, Guillermo, if you want to add anything, perhaps also on the question of, perhaps you can also say a little bit more about the interplay between development institutions in Europe and your institution. That would, I think, perhaps be interesting for the audience to learn a bit more how CAF is relating to the various instruments that the EU has. But perhaps, Commissioner, the two questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the questions and your contribution to this to our today's panel. On fair trade, indeed, European Union has been really supporting and leading in supporting the multilateral rules-based trade system with a number of trade agreements, free trade agreements, and this is something we shall definitely continue and pursue. We are among, I would say, few global strong economic and trade partners that link together very much also the human rights approach to our trade and free trade relations. And in that context, you will witness in the future even much more than we were engaged so far. But you would witness that fair trade approach and fair trade concept will be more and more visible in our overall relations and our assistance to the value chains and increasing the capacity of our partner countries to go up the ladder of added value to their production. So yes, indeed, I support very much and I look forward very much to our engagement in fair trade based relations. On our cooperation and contribution to the also to the other regions that might not be in the direct focus of our development cooperation, but they are part of it, especially in the Caribbean region, on overseas countries and territories or outermost regions. We have in our proposal for the next budget, next 7 years budget, we propose to increase substantially the financing capacity to support the development of outermost regions, even at the point where the number of these regions that were related to the UK will not be part of the overall development and economic support schemes, but per region, per capita, per country, our support will only grow in the next period.
Two comments, or two or three comments. We have very bad experiences in Latin America with institutions for integration. We try to copy the institution of the European Union. Let me say, I was Secretary General of the Andean Community, and we tried to do it. Well, all you know what's happened with the Andean Community, just for reason of ideology. That very important space strategically, for example, for my country. Thanks, Ambassador of Colombia, to be here. We are all friends. But the institution really is a matter of clear concern. We just published a report in which 75% of Latin Americans don't believe on governments and don't believe in institutions. That's a terrible result. There is no confidence. Then that's why we believe that we have to build institutions or strengthen institutions able to give a clear leadership in the issues that I mentioned in education, infrastructure, energy, to recover that confidence on the people, because the disaffection of the people with the governments and the people with the people people with the institution are very clear problem for the next years. And the other comment is, for political reason, the region start creating a lot of institutions. And we fragmented the institutions. And those institutions lost the clear objectives when they were founded. Then we have to redefine institutions. And we need institutions, strong institutions, to increase our skills. Skills, especially from the childhood, is a very important issue, as we presented in our reports, for the future of productivity in our countries. Then the issue of institution is one, for example, in which we can, I'm sure, look in a different approach to cooperation with the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the ambassador wanted to follow up with one very quick comment, and then I think I have to close because the commissioner has to go. So very quick.
Just a very, very quick comment, and thank you for the invitation. But just following on what Commissioner Mimica said, I think it's very important to reflect on how to create a new model for cooperation between the EU and Latin America in the 21st century, which acknowledges that the continent has made huge progress, but we still have big problems, but that this cooperation, as Commissioner Mimica said, has to be more than anything an enabler for other things, and it has to be much more linked to trade. So, for example, in the case of Colombia, we've been working very closely with DEFCO on how to use the support we're getting for the implementation of the peace agreement to also lure private investment and to build bridges with the free trade agreement we have with the EU. And that's just one model, but you could think of other things. Commissioner Mimica mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's a very nice phrase. You know, we're all developing countries into which, by the way, was many don't know, but this was a Colombian invention of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so you have a framework there to have sort of shared experiences, but also to make sure you think differently about cooperation, and you bring it much more in line with what you're doing on the trade side of things. Sometimes in Brussels it's not so easy to do this because with the Commission everyone is doing his own thing. But I think the line that Commissioner Mimica has been pushing for and that we are supporting ourselves is something that should be the object of deeper study. How do you cooperation in the 21st century?
Do you want to read? Yeah. Do you want to say one word? Or?
I fully agree with the Ambassador. We discuss it, not only discuss this approach, concepts of especially support to the more productivity, more competitiveness, or enabling the implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, and to link it with the trade capacity, with the enhancing the trade channels. And we not only discuss it, and we not only agreed, but in the just forthcoming measures, proposals that we shall now have to, and that we already decided actually to replenish or increase our support to the Colombia Trust Fund operations. We agreed, and we are working on including the trade dimension or tradability of the goods that would be produced in the areas of a conflict before. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the Commissioner and Guillermo Fernandez de Soto for their opening speeches. And I look forward then to the next panel. Thank you.